So for years at Box of Crayons, we've talked about our company as a way of saying we help people and organizations do less good work and more great work. And people tend to kind of nod and go, yeah, that sounds intriguing. But honestly, recently I've tweaked that language a little bit and I say this: I help people work less hard but have more impact. And that makes people go, absolutely, now you're talking. Now this is something that I want more of. And of course, I want people to work less hard because actually people are overwhelmed at the moment. There's just so much going on in our hyper-connected world where email never stops pinging and you're always available by text and you can take your laptop anywhere. There are no boundaries. So you have to be really thoughtful about how you spend your time and how much you let your work life leak into your life outside work. And the choice is yours. And some people like a little, some people like a lot, some like none at all. But I think for all of us, that benefit of saying, how do I work less hard, can be beneficial. But many of us are also really driven by the work that we do. We get fulfillment, we get meaning, we get engagement out of it. We want to leave our little dent in the universe. So working less hard isn't about having less impact. It's about going, how can you work less hard but have more impact? How can you scale up the work that you do? And actually, I don't know about you, but when I think about it, I often don't do a great job at measuring impact. I measure tasks done, I tick off all my things on my to-do list. I get a sense of, am I busy or am I not busy? I have a sense of, did I fulfill all my obligations to the world? Did I answer my emails? Did I attend my meetings? Did I be nice to my manager and my leader? And there's these different ways that you kind of measure how you're showing up in the world. But we often step away from that conversation is, well, what does success look like for me? How do I define the impact that I want to have in this world? And how do I know if I'm getting close to it or not to it? So, big questions to wrestle with. I'm still struggling with that myself. I mean, I do have a personal mission, which is this. I want to infect 1 billion people with the possibility virus. And that to me is a very compelling kind of call forward into the future because it makes me think, how do I really scale the work that I do? How do I get myself out of the way so I'm not the bottleneck to the impact that I have? How do I find a way of making as much of my work as available to as many people as possible so that I can try and have the impact that I want in the world? But the truth is I don't always keep that mission statement close and center for me, so I sometimes lose track of that. What I find is that sometimes it's useful to have other people's insights about how to increase impact. And I want to share with you 3 books that I think are actually pretty good in terms of sharing new insights for you to think about how you can increase the impact that you want to have in the work you do and in the life that you lead. The first book to talk about is Scaling Up Excellence, Getting to More Without Settling for Less. It's by Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao. They're based out on the West Coast in Silicon Valley. Bob Sutton's a lovely man. I've met him a few times. He's written a number of great books. I really liked this book. It really took a lot of lessons, many of them from Silicon Valley, but actually from organizations across the US, and went, how do you take that little bit of good that's sort of thriving in some small part of an organization and get it to grow? Because many of us will have seen the situation where a little bit of good seems to be working, but for some reason it just doesn't spread the way that you hope. It doesn't scale up. And scale can be everything. It's a very Silicon Valley mindset, but it's useful for all of us. So lots of good stuff in this book. One of the things that I point to is this key insight that bad is stronger than good. And he unpacks what he means in one of the chapters here where he says, look, if you're trying to make good stuff happen, you need to understand that the impact of bad is actually far more destabilizing than good is motivating. And I suspect this is neurological. We have a bias in our brains, just built from thousands and thousands of years of survival to go, on balance, I'm going to treat things as dangerous and unsafe rather than rewarding and safe. Because if I'm a little cautious, then I'm actually going to survive if it's actually bad. If I'm a bit of gung-ho, assume it's going to be good, then I'm at risk of being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So I suspect there's some sort of deeply primitive neurological reason why this is so. But his insight in the book is bad is stronger than good, and actually he quantifies it. He says, a bad comment, a bad person, is 5 times more influential than a good comment or a good person. So for the two authors here, they're very much about how do you nip bad in the bud, or as they say, how do we break bad, breaking bad. It's a bad pun, but it's literally a bad pun, I guess. So they talk about different ways to actually tackle the badness, and here's a few of them. One is about, and the metaphor they use is put plumbing before pictures. And they talk about actually a situation in a hospital which was struggling, was falling apart, and the leadership that turned this hospital around and scaled it up to a success started off by focusing on the infrastructure, the foundation, rather than trying to paint the walls a pretty color and make it feel nicer. So I think the starting point is to go, what do we need to fix that's fundamental in the infrastructure to eliminate bad? That's the first thing. The second thing is about understanding that you get to adequate before you get to excellence. If you're trying to go from bad to excellence, that's a huge leap and you often fail. More successful is to define and then strive for how do we become adequate, because from the foundation of adequate you can then step towards a foundation of excellence. So I think that's the second thing they talk about in terms of breaking bad. And the third thing I think is really interesting here is you get the cool kids to help stamp out the bad. And this is about getting political, about savvy, about going, who are the key influences around here? And how do I get them on the side of the light rather than on the side of the dark? And if you can engage those cool people, be them kids, be them adults, whoever it might be, the key influences, you're far more likely to be able to tackle the bad because you have the right people on your side. So that's the first book I wanted to talk about, Scaling Up Excellence, fantastic read. The second book I want to talk about is Smart Cuts by Shane Snow. Now he's an entrepreneur based in New York, but he took time off. He's trained as a journalist originally, so this is a lovely, well-written book. And he actually said, why do some people really seem to become masters, really seem to elevate their game? So he examined people who had reached the top of their game, be them DJs or be them surfers or be them entrepreneurs, and went, what are they doing differently that really makes such an impact? And there's a lot of good in this book, everything from studying with masters to building a platform for success, so actually not just a single route for success, but a broader platform. But the chapter that I would point to here, and I wanted to talk about with you, is this idea of imagining 10x. So if you're trying to increase your impact, his insight is this. Rather than going, I'm going to double it, or I'm going to do 50% more than I did last time, set yourself the super ambitious target of 10xing the impact you're currently having. And here's what's powerful about that. Once you strive to set yourself a 10x goal, you don't get to 10x by doing what you're doing now. You can't just work harder, work smarter to get to 10x. You have to reinvent the way that you're currently working. So part of what's powerful about the 10x goal is it forces you back to fundamentals to say, why do I need to reimagine the way I work, the way my team works, for us to get to that next level of impact? So that's the key takeaway for me from Shane Snow's book, the 10x approach. What's your goal now? What's that goal 10x? And now, how does that change things in terms of how you approach your next steps forward? The third book, The First 20 Hours, How to Learn Anything Fast by Geoff Kaufman. Now, he's the author of The Personal MBA. This is a multi-thousand selling book, and very smart because he went, look, if you're a self-educator, if you want to get an MBA education without paying MBA prices, here are the 40 or so books that I thoroughly recommend that will ground you in the same level of education that an MBA will give you. So he had a lot of success with that first book. And then he published The First 20 Hours. And really, it's called The First 20 Hours because it's a direct riposte to Malcolm Gladwell. And you will have heard of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule. You know, the whole thing around, you have to do something for 10,000 hours before you become really good at it. And of course, if you're already a dedicated maniac, you go, fantastic, I'm going to put in my 10,000 hours. If you're a normal person like you and me, you go, I don't have 10,000 hours to become good at X. And what Kaufman found, I think, is very useful is to say, look, yeah, 10,000 hours is required if you want to become a grandmaster in chess or a world-class athlete or a world-class musician. But most of us don't need to be world class. We just need to be good enough. We need to be adequate. So part of what Kaufman says is, how do you think about rapid skill acquisition? Because that's the way that takes you from nothing to something fast. And I think this can be really powerful. Now, there are 4 steps to rapid skill acquisition. The first step is deconstructing the key things that make the most difference. This is the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule. A few things, the 20%, make most of the difference. So how do you figure out what makes most of the difference in terms of the new skill that you're going to learn? And this takes some thinking, it takes some research, but is well worth doing it. For instance, if you're learning a musical instrument, you might discover that learning 3 simple chords, C, G, and A, will actually give you access to 80% of the world's music, because of the way 80% of the world's music is basically structured through those 3 chords alone. So that could be the deconstruction piece, if a musical instrument. The second piece is figuring out exactly what you need to learn so that you get that Pareto effect. You get to focus on the things that make the most difference. The third principle is about how do you remove the barriers so that you get to practice the new skill that you want to practice. Because when we're in that first stages of practicing, what they call conscious incompetence, it's awkward, it's difficult, you realize just how bad you are, you'll find any excuse to not practice. So how do you make it really easy for you to actually pick up the thing or do the thing and practice what you want to practice? You know, if you're learning a musical instrument again, how do you leave your ukulele by your desk chair? So every time you have a break, you pick up the ukulele and you practice those 3 essential chords. And then the fourth and final step is, just as the title of the book would have you believe, it's to practice those critical factors for at least 20 hours. And Josh's point of view here is say, if you find the core things to practice, you figure a way how to practice, and you practice them for 20 hours, you'll get that rapid skill acquisition. And there's something very powerful about that, about scaling up from nothing to something very quickly. And look, I know I said 3 books, but I'm going to sneak in a 4th book, and I'm sneaking it in because it's my book. It's actually the first book I published. It's called Get Unstuck and Get Going. And what this is it's an idea generating book. I actually wrote the book because I went to myself, look, I love coaching, but I want coaching to be available to everybody. And sometimes I see official life coaches or executive coaches doing coaching where I went, you're not adding that much value. This person could figure this stuff out themselves if they had the right tool. And Get Unstuck and Get Going is that tool. It's a self-coaching tool. And you bring a challenge to the book. You open up the flip sections. It's like one of those kids' books that has a ballerina's head and a soccer player's body and a moonwalker's legs. And it will generate up to 50,000 different combinations of questions to provoke you to think differently about the challenge you have. And you know that I'm a champion for better options, because better options lead to better choices, and better choices lead to better outcomes. So the 4th and final book, which I'm sneaking in undercover, is to say Get Unstuck and Get Going is a way of quickly and rapidly generating bolder, more courageous, more interesting choices, so that when you move ahead with whatever your challenge happens to be, you'll actually have a better strategies for moving forward on that. Impact really matters, and to do that you've got to bring in some real expertise about how can you scale up and how can you increase your impact. And I think those 3 books, plus my own book that I mentioned at the end there, are some critical ways forward to helping you increase your impact, and in doing so do less good work and more great work.